Sweeps here, and before we get to today's story, I want to make something clear. I appreciate the people who have the courage and time to make these Reddit posts. Even though I'm a small channel, at least on this one, I like to make sure that I properly credit those stories who I read. That being said, when it comes to stories, either Reddit or as a whole the entire internet, that doesn't mean I'll leave everything I read online.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies?
Now, I can't say I know for a fact that people are lying, but there are some times where there are stories that have telltale signs that make me scrutinize a little more. Whenever you're reading a story from Reddit or Twitter or wherever you are, you have to remember that people have biases. I've got them, you've got them, we've all got them. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with having a bias so long as you're not hurting anyone or denying them anything. For example, I have a bias towards having extra cheese on my pizza, and I have a bias against putting olives on pizza. You heathens! But at the end of the day, that's not hurting anyone. So today's story is why I often take a hard look at what people are saying and what information they give whenever they tell a story. Let's begin. The player only lasted one session. He rolled up an allegedly lawful good cleric of a very strict god of justice and law. During the traditional tavern meetup, Cleric is accosted by an old woman who berates him in a tirade of banalities about the corruption of the clergy, their role in propping up an unjust social order, etc. While doing this, she smacks him repeatedly with her walking stick. Owing to her advanced age, this attack does 0 damage per hit. The cleric's response is to yell, "Foul hag, I curse you in the name of my god," and smack her with his holy symbol. Everyone's jaw drops. The DM impresses on the player that a cleric cursing someone is serious business, and that this feeble old woman, possibly senile or drunk, and clearly no threat to anybody. But the player insists that the common rabble must learn respect from someone of my station. Okay, the DM narrates that the cleric falls to his knees, hit by an invisible force, losing half his current HP and all his current spell slots. An unknown but familiar voice sounds in his head, "Atone!" Taking the hint, the cleric goes to his room and spends the night in prayer and contrition, grumbling that he misses out on the traditional bar fight. Alright, so right off the bat, I can see some issues here. Is this a session 0? If it isn't, then remember, this is the first session, and already we're being met with some shady behavior from the DM here. And here's a question: how many other PCs are being accosted for their character choice? In fact, there's a lot of details that are missing here. OP says the cleric is under a very old, strict god of justice and law, but which god is that? Is it homebrew? What domain was he going for? In fact, this is a cleric class, but that doesn't automatically define what the character is. Was he a priest? I assume maybe, because the old woman is complaining about the clergy. There's also the holy symbol part. There's no mention of what the holy symbol looks like, and for those who aren't familiar, a holy symbol according to the player's handbook, typical holy symbols take the form of amulets, emblems on shields, or equalaries that are contained fragments of sacred material. So with this lack of details, one could assume either the worst, that the cleric slammed the woman with a shield, or he bonked her with a wooden amulet. We don't know, and considering the lack of detail, that is at the very least sus. I also have an issue with the punishment. This is the beginning of the first session. Was Cleric in the wrong for attacking an elderly woman? Yes, I suppose, but considering from what we have to go on, it's playing out that not even a minute in, or even talking to the rest of the party, you're being assaulted and berated by an NPC that's essentially insulting you for your choice in character. That was supposedly approved by the DM. And when you retaliate with a bonk to the head that didn't do any damage either, because OP didn't specify that, you get punished by your god by having your HP halved and get all your spell spots removed. As part of the beginning, it seems a little harsh. It's session 1. Sure, the player responded in a bad way, but removing him from the social aspect of joining the party and blasting his HP/spell slots is piling way too much onto a single character. Also, clerics can't really curse people, at least not as far as I can tell. If anything, that could be cursing someone out like or YouTube's programming is making it hard for me to say things at times. It also seems really unfair to cut a player out from meeting the rest of the party and cutting them out from an RP session. It's session 1. You're supposed to have your party meet up so they can have some connection. This seems way too much of a punishment for a bonk that does 0 damage. Oh well, c'est la vie. The next morning, for reasons having nothing to do with the proceeding, the party wakes up to the plot hook of half the town being turned into monsters. The cleric is now a skeleton. After narrowly avoiding a fight against some spooked townspeople, the party decides to visit the city guard, explain the situation as best they can, and offer to help. To avoid potential misunderstandings, they decide to take the monster-fied party members in handcuffs. Cleric does not like this idea. He spends nearly 20 minutes arguing with the rest of the party before they compromise on putting him in a collar instead, leaving his hands free. The guard's immediate response to the party walking into their guardhouse with monsters on leashes is to draw steel and demand they lay face down on the ground. Thus the party party complies, but Cleric decides to be the tough guy, insisting that these peon guards respect my spiritual authority. The guards insist that the Cleric lie down. Cleric refuses, then pulls out his mace. The DM warns Cleric that he can see that these guards are tough, well-trained, experienced, armed with long swords that appear to be magic, and oh, there are 7 of them. Cleric's response, bring it on! One round of combat later, Cleric has taken his max HP and damage and is deader than dead. Cleric, nonplussed, boasts that his god will surely resurrect such a loyal and faithful servant as himself. Okay, so we've got another reason why I don't trust OP, and why I think the DM is an antagonist in this story. You're telling me that everyone was okay with their characters being changed into monsters in the first session. Unless there was a meeting beforehand about this, something like this isn't exactly usual to do, especially if it's so early in the campaign, since players tend to care about their characters and have specifics about them. Even if you're okay with it, you have to admit that not everyone's gonna be on board with it unless it's talked about beforehand. Also, the rest of the party doesn't seem too good either. I mean, think about it. There's this guy who admittedly seems a little pompous and full of himself, but he's turned into a monster. Not a common occurrence, and what do you do to the guy who's presumably a man of God? You want to chain him up and drag him around, almost treated like a slave. Gee, I can't imagine why the Cleric wouldn't be on board with that idea. And you want to drag him to a bunch of overpowered guards who apparently don't realize that half the town has been turned into monsters, and ignore that the monsters in the party are dragged in, aren't attacking, and are chained up? I'm not gonna act like Cleric isn't acting like a dummy here. Fighting 7 guards with magical weapons on your own, with what I assume is an early level character, it ain't gonna end well. But at any point, did DM talk to player out of character? Even if you just want to say that the Cleric is being bad at this point, this comes off as more as the character just not gelling with the playstyle, and the real horror is the DM. Oh, and it gets better. DM calmly but firmly informs Cleric that his god is a god of law and justice, and the last day Cleric has abused his station to bully commoners, misused his divine authority badly enough to get punished by his god personally, disrespected and picked a fight with some guards, legitimate agents of law, who were just doing their jobs, gotten killed while resisting arrest by said legitimate agents of the law, and by the way, he can't expect help from the party either, since they met him only yesterday. He has been nothing but trouble, and doesn't even have any treasure or magic to repay them resurrecting him. Cleric's response? Oh. Awkward silence fills the table. Then the Cleric pipes up again. Hey, wait a minute, I'm a skeleton. They're using bladed weapons. That means I take half damage. Alright, so first off, if this is 5e, then the player doesn't really know all that much about skeletons. They have a vulnerability to bludgeoning damage and immunity to poison, but no resistance to slashing damage unless there's something I'm missing. Which, you know, is totally possible because, hey, only human, or robot. But that's not the big issue. It's the DM's response here that solidifies him as the bad guy in this story to me. Let's go through these one by one, shall we? Abused his station to bully commoners. First off, it was commoner. A commoner who was attacking him regardless of 0 damage and accosting him for simply being a cleric, and one act that he actively atoned for. Misused his divine authority badly enough to get punished by his god personally. When did that happen? He misuses his divine authority, I mean? And punished by his god personally. That was the DM's decision to go that far. Disrespected and picked a fight with some guards. Legitimate agents of law who are just doing their jobs. It's not picking a fight when you just walk into a building and people draw their weapons on you, threatening to kill you. By that logic, Ash was picking a fight in this scene.
Super potion, please! Oh no, I don't need a new gun.
As for doing their jobs, oh yeah, they were doing their jobs so well they didn't realize that half the town became monsters. How convenient that none of these guards saw this, or none of them got turned to monsters themselves on their way to work. Gotten killed while resisting arrest by said legitimate agents of the law. How is this a point against Cleric? He can't really control not dying. I mean, aside from not picking a fight. And by the way, he can't expect help from the party either, since they met him only yesterday. He has been nothing but trouble, and doesn't even have any treasure or magic to repay them for resurrecting him. Been nothing but trouble? Am I missing something here? The only thing between this and the guard station was him being accosted by a drunk elderly woman and retaliating. And again, no damage was done to the woman. If you're referring to the argument that he had with the party, I think that's pretty understandable because, frankly, with that situation, I too would argue with that. Probably not almost 20 minutes worth, but we don't know full details if the plan was decided beforehand or if he was debating at the same time. And again, no damage was done to the elderly woman either. That was not specified. And honestly, it feels like this DM is either inexperienced or is really railroady to me. And I have no hate for the OP. But it's clear that there's a bit of a bias going on. Hell, we don't know anything about OP from this story. Where did they fall into this? Part of me now thinks that OP is actually the DM. It wouldn't be unheard of, and there's a part of me that made me raise an eyebrow. After narrowly avoiding a fight against some spooked townspeople, the party decides to visit the city guard and explain the situation as best they can and offer to help. To avoid potential misunderstandings, they decide to take the monstrified party members in handcuffs. Notice the word choice there. They, not we. Now, maybe I'm reading a bit too much into this, and I've got a tinfoil hat on, but it's a little weird to refer the party that way if you're a part of them, unless you are actually a third party to this, like the DM or someone who is observing this. It could just be a bad word choice. Still, I doubt we'll get an actual answer. I don't hate the OP, but if you were to tilt your head slightly, you could see how this could be a different flavor of a horror story for the Cleric. Anyways, thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a thumbs up and a comment. That really helps the channel out, and it's free. Bye bye!